political financing has been the subject of debate over several years, and unfortunately, no proposal has so far met unanimity across the political spectrum. However, the first concrete attempt in our political history to introduce a political financing bill into the National Assembly to regulate the financing of political parties was made in 2019. In fact, the genesis of this bill can be traced back to December 2015, when government, under the Prime Ministership of late Sir Niru Jagnat, had set up a ministerial committee to make recommendations on several important aspects of our electoral system. The terms of reference of the ministerial committee were, amongst others, to make proposals on electoral reform with a view to introducing a dose of proportional representation in the National Assembly and proposing a draft financing of political parties bill. The recommendations of the Ministerial Committee, chaired at that time by Minister Mentor, were approved by Government on 30th November 2018. Following a consultation exercise on 2nd July 2019, I myself, as Prime Minister, introduced the Constitution Amendment Bill and the Political Financing Bill in the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, the object of the Political Financing Bill was to provide for accountability and transparency with regard to the financing of, inter alia, political parties at a general election with a view to preventing undue influence and corruption. In addition to conferring powers to the Electoral Supervisory Commission and Electoral Commission to investigate into the financial affairs of registered political parties for the better regulation of political financing, the bill provided for, inter alia, the legal framework for political financing and donations, instances where acceptance of donation would be prohibited, ceiling on expenditure, limitations on donation in kind, and obligations to keep accounting records, as well as sanctions and offences for non-compliance with provisions of that proposed legislation. Given that the political financing bill proposed, in addition to the widening of the functions and powers of the Electoral Supervisory Commission and the Electoral Commissioner, relevant amendments to Section 41 of the Constitution were required. Accordingly, the Constitution Amendment Bill, which aimed at providing additional powers and functions to the ESC and the Electoral Commissioner, was introduced at the same time as the Political Financing Bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is also apposite to note that under Clause 12 of the Political Financing Bill, donations from foreign governments, foreign entities, and non-citizens to political parties would not have been allowed and would have been treated as prohibited donations. In fact, according to the database of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, out of 180 countries, 126 have placed some form of ban on donations from foreign governments or foreign individuals. And such countries include the United Kingdom, Singapore, South Africa, Switzerland, the United States, Japan, Norway, Canada, Brazil, and France, amongst others. The main argument behind is to limit the threat of foreign interests undermining a country's democracy. Mr. Speaker, sir, in addition, the political financing bill provided that no person shall make a donation to an individual member of a registered political party other than to the treasurer of that party. Obligations for political parties to keep a register of donations as well as accounting records showing inter alia entries of all donations received and the requirement to submit an audited statement of account to the ESC were also provided therein. Mr. Speaker, sir, regrettably, both bills could not secure a three-quarter majority as required by Section 47(2)(b) of the Constitution, as the opposition parties voted against the enactment of the bills. The rejection of the political financing bill demonstrated the lack of will of the opposition parties to promote a culture of transparency and integrity in the political arena. In fact, after the rejection of the Constitution Amendment Bill 2018, this turned out to be the second time that the opposition boycotted prominent attempts at electoral reform. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to point out that although the opposition parties had commissioned a few reports on electoral reform when they were in government, they never walked the talk. Moreover, none of their reports addressed the issue of political financing. Let me cite a few examples. Neither the Carcassonne report, which was released in 2011, nor the Sitanen report, published in January 2012, dealt with the issue of political financing. Similarly, the consultation paper on electoral reform, which was presented by the then Prime Minister in March 2014, overlooked that issue. Reports that examine political financing are the Sachs Commission report of 2002 and the Select Committee set up in 2002 under the chair of Mr. Emmanuel Jiangxing on funding of political parties. Mr. Speaker, sir, with regard to Part A of the question, I wish to highlight that since November 2019, I'm heading a new government with new political partners, and we will be holding consultations on the electoral reform which the government would wish to bring about, including political financing. Once the government comes up with a proposal and formula for the financing of political parties, consultations would be held with the Electoral Supervisory Commission, the Electoral Commissioner, and other relevant stakeholders, and the bill would be introduced in the National Assembly in due course. Mr. Speaker, sir, as regards Part B of the question, I wish to highlight that to date, there is no provision in our electoral legislation which prohibits receiving donations from foreign sources. Rather, we have limits on electoral expenses under Part 4 sections 49 to 57 of the Representation of the People Act in regard to election expenses incurred by candidates at an election. Mr. Speaker, sir, however, with regard to acceptance of cash donations, whether from local or foreign sources, any person who makes or accepts any payment in cash in excess of 500,000 rupees or an equivalent amount in foreign currency, or such amount as may be prescribed, shall commit an offence under the Financial Intelligence and Anti-Money Laundering Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, furthermore, it would constitute an offence under the Customs Act and the Customs Regulations 1989 if a person, whether incoming, outgoing, or in transit, makes a physical cross-border transportation of, amongst others, currency of an amount of more than 500,000 Mauritian rupees or its equivalent in foreign currency without making a declaration to customs, so as to be in conformity with the customs legislation. Such person should submit the relevant declaration form to the customs or make an online declaration through the MRA website.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Honourable Prime Minister mentioned about the December 2015, where there was the setting up of a ministerial committee on the electoral reform. Can the Honourable Prime Minister inform the House whether the said committee submitted any report on the issue of financial of political parties? And if yes, whether the contents of the said report were taken on board in the preparation of the political financing bill, which was introduced into the House in 2019. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, I can recall that, in fact, initially, the committee was set up under the chair of Honorable Xavier Duval when he was in government. I don't know whether I have the information. So it was set up in December 2015, and it had in fact submitted a report on the financing of political parties in April 2016, and the report, however, was very scanty and was lacking in important details, so that the Attorney General's office was unable to prepare a bill. I am informed that the Attorney General's office consequently had raised a series of questions and issues which had to be addressed before they could even start preparing the bill. And amongst the issues that were raised were the following: the scope of the additional powers which had to be given to the Electoral Supervisory Commission, the transparency and disclosure rules that would apply to private funding, the applicability to political donations of the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act, and the Financial Intelligence and Anti-Money Laundering Act that had to be clearly set out. Consultations also with the Rodrigues Regional Assembly on the proposed new expenditure thresholds in relation particularly to the Rodrigues Regional Assembly elections, and the absence of indication about the type of sanctions that would apply in case of any breach of the law. So all these issues, Mr. Speaker, sir, had not been addressed by the then Deputy Prime Minister in his report. So following the departure of the then Deputy Prime Minister from government, the newly constituted Ministerial Committee under the chair of Minister Mentor, re-examine all those issues, and particularly those that were raised by the State Law Office, and therefore made appropriate recommendations that were taken on board in the preparation of the 2019 bill. Yep.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister. Referring to the second part of my question again, has the Honourable Prime Minister taken cognizance of statement made by the former Prime Minister on Friday 10th of March on a private radio, whereby he confirmed that he received a donation from foreign sources, dollar notes, sealed packets? If yes, can the Honourable Prime Minister inform whether the former Prime Minister has complied with the law? Thank you.
Well, let me check. I have also requested a transcript of what was said at this interview. There were, of course, different comments that were made by the former Prime Minister with regard to this particular issue at a broadcast by a private radio. And we know that there were dollar notes in sealed packets that had been found in his coffer. Out of a total of $3.16 million, $1.7 million were in sealed plastic bags and were serially numbered. And although the latter confirmed that he had received those dollars from foreign sources, he has still not yet revealed those sources. And concerning the second part of the question, from the interview given by the former Prime Minister, it is, I must say, it is obvious when I read this transcript that those dollars were not declared because, let me remind the House again, according to Section 131A of the Customs Act, there is an obligation to declare any amount of funds entering or leaving Mauritius in excess of 500,000 rupees. So I note in that interview, he carefully replies by saying that he had no choice, in fact, because the law is there, he could not abide by the law, and he had no choice than not to abide by the law. This is really fantastic, amazing, Mr. Speaker, sir.
No, naturally. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Can the Honourable Prime Minister inform the House if any political parties in recent years have obtained donations from companies operating a Ponzi scheme? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, the House and the nation know fully well the presence of a huge Ponzi scheme being operated by BAI was mentioned, in fact, for the very first time in this House by no one else than Honourable Paul Béranger when he addressed a PNQ in his capacity as the then leader of the opposition. On the 21st of November 2013, to the then Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the then leader of the opposition stated, and I quote, "The whole financial system was based on an insurance makeup built on a huge Ponzi scheme," unquote. However, we also know that after concluding an alliance with the Labour Party for the 2014 general elections, the MMM, led by Honourable Paul Béranger, accepted a cheque of 10 million rupees dated the 6th of November 2014 as donation from the same BAI that he accused of running a huge Ponzi scheme.
Honourable Prime Minister, properly, can you repeat the amount that was given to that party? Honourable Prime Minister.
In this case, I said 10 million rupees through a cheque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask the Honourable Prime Minister, I think he will recollect that one of the fundamental contentions was about public funding of political parties. We were very near a consensus to have a majority in the House. And the question was whether we can have public funding together with private funding, as is the case in France and elsewhere, even if we could do it symbolically. So may I ask the Honourable Prime Minister whether the position of the MSM is still not to consider public funding, and I would also ask him whether this bill, which is to come, whether he can give us a time frame for its presentation in the House.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the honourable member will recall, of course, that the original draft had included a recommendation for funding, for public funding. And then, through consultations, he will recall that we decided at that time that we would not be moving for public funding because some members of the opposition had already taken a stand against public funding. I don't wish to the honourable member will recall there was a campaign that had started in public to say that, well, why is it that now government should start funding political parties? So we said, let us move step by step. And this is why we limited the proposal to financing by the private parties. Now, the honourable member will recall he was also part in the committee. He was also a member of the government, and he also took part in the debate, and he also defended that bill and voted, in fact, for the bill. And I'm happy that. But I hope you have not changed your mind today because you are in the opposition, right? So yes, we will, of course, as I have stated, Mr. Speaker, sir, now it is not the same government because we have other members also. Well, first of all, other partners in alliance, and then there are other members also in government. We will be holding those consultations, and then we will hold also consultations with members of the opposition, of course, and public at large also, so that we could, I hope, this time we can rally a consensus, because I think it is high time that we put our ego on the side and come up with a regulation, with a bill, so that we can regulate the financing of political parties.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honourable Prime Minister state whether there was any mention of a political financing bill prior to 2014?
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, from the records available, I'm informed as follows. In the Sachs report on electoral reform of 2002, the creation of a political activities public financing fund was proposed. And the Sachs Commission also came up with a draft bill on political funding. The 2004 Yangxing report was in fact on funding of political parties and included also a draft bill on political financing. In the 2011 Carcassonne report on electoral reform, there was no mention of political funding. The Sitanen report on electoral reform of January 2012 also did not make any mention of political funding. There was also no mention on political financing in the consultation paper on electoral reform of March 2014. And in the government program 2005-2010, there was no specific mention of political financing. The government program of 2012-2015 refers, in fact, barely to the financing of political parties. The government program of 2015-2019, of course, clearly mentions financing of political parties legislation, and government, in fact, did come up, as I say, with a political financing bill. And in the government program 2020-2024 does mention that a new bill on the financing of political parties will be introduced in the National Assembly.
For the sake of transparency, since we are talking about financing of political parties, is the Honourable Prime Minister prepared to table a list of all donors to the MSM, including Mr. Lishim, who said he had paid him 10 million rupees.
Mr.
And Mr. Lishim, he said that on radio, that he paid you 10 million rupees, and a list of all donors who enable you to construct Sunstruck.
Honourable Member, don't mention the name of people.
Can you give a list of all donors which enable the MSM to build the Sun Trust, and a list of all donors who financed your campaign last year?
And what about all the donors which have provided financially substantial amount to the MMM? And we are proud. We have received donations from the private sector. We have a headquarters for the party. Your party, you have received donations. I can wonder whether who has pocketed this amount. You don't even have a headquarters. What are you talking about? And if you want a list, we all know apart from pocketing. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, sir? The leader of that party, il dénonce, laissez-moi peut-être parler en français pour qu'ils comprennent un peu mieux ce que j'ai dit avant, il dénonce la BAI d'opérer un Ponzi scheme. Hein? Imaginez, et puis, tout d'un coup, lorsqu'il fait l'alliance avec le Parti travailliste, il accepte un chèque de 10 millions de roupies de ce Ponzi scheme. Comment vous pouvez qualifier cela? Et en plus, qui ne sait pas que Monsieur G que vous connaissez, vous parlez des courses, parlez de l'argent que vous avez reçu des gens, des bookmakers. Hein? Pourquoi vous ne parlez pas de l'argent que vous avez reçu de la mafia de courses avec certains que je nommerai pas, et qui ne sait pas, une autre personnalité, Monsieur G, qui, je ne sais pas s'il est un membre de votre parti, en tout cas, il a collaboré à l'élaboration de votre programme gouvernemental. Ça, on le sait. Il a participé à plusieurs réunions, dont des réunions à Rivière-Noire. Il a participé, il a aidé à la campagne du MMM. Oui, mais je vous pose la question, allez demander à votre leader comment il a financé le MMM. Allez demander à votre leader, votre leader n'est pas là aujourd'hui, regardez derrière vous, demandez à l'honorable Amiemia comment il a financé. L'honorable Amiemia pourrait vous dire.
No, Nakshadi, last question.
Mr. Speaker.
On the point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my name has been mentioned by the Prime Minister. Speaker, what's going on in his house? Let me make my point. Mr. Speaker, let me make...
Both sides of the House, order. Make your point.
I can assure the House, including the Prime Minister, but whatever donation that the MMM has received, and I will ask the Honourable Prime Minister if he can bring a law with backdated effect 7 years or 10 years for all parties concerned, we, the MMM, shall deposit our bank statement in this House. shall deposit our bank statement in this house.
Please. Order. This is not a point of order, but I allowed you to make your case. Okay? So, last question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. In his reply, the Honourable Prime Minister mentioned that he is coming with a bill in due course, and now we have heard of donations, pocketing and everything. So can the Honourable Prime Minister inform the House if in the bill that he intends to bring in this House, if there will be any provisions to prevent political leaders like we have seen in the past, taking the donation money and keeping it in their personal safe together with the tablets and pills?
Well, this is the very purpose why we want to, on our side, on this side of the House, we want to regulate the financing of political parties, because it has become public knowledge that we have a former Prime Minister who has been, in fact, not only, using political party funds for his own use also. He has also drawn from the official bank account of a political party to try